a knife attack in Japan, and an IED in Canada you probably haven't heard about. That's all coming up on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. I'm getting ready to take off and head back to Panama, but before I do, I just wanted to knock out this podcast. Let's talk for a little bit about this stabbing attack that took place a couple days ago in Japan. I wanted to wait a couple of days and try to get more information about what actually happened, but it appears that there were essentially there's one guy who attacked a whole bunch of schoolgirls waiting for a bus, if you can imagine such a horrific thing. 19 people total casualties, one of them the attacker. 2 girls died, or I guess 1 adult, 1 girl died, and the attacker killed himself by stabbing himself in the neck. Absolutely horrific to have something like this happen in a civilized society. I mean, this is not the kind of thing. We're not hearing about this out of Somalia or out of Sudan or out of places where you would expect that kind of violence. Even Syria, I didn't see that kind of stuff. Obviously, there's horrible things happening everywhere, but good grief, out of a civilized country like Japan. And that got me thinking. So I got looking into things like the suicide rate in Japan, and it's, I think, number 3 on the planet right now. The suicide rate in Japan is just off the charts. It's also very bad in other civilized countries, other Western countries even. The suicide rate, even here in the United States, is kind of going through the roof. I just wonder if that correlates to these kinds of attacks, because sometimes people, they just want to punch out, but they want to get some publicity on their way out, and so they do something horrific like this. It's hard to try to get into the mind of an attacker, isn't it? But the bottom line is, what's surprising here is that when I got looking into the suicide rates around the world, what I found was that, okay, number 1 is Lithuania, number 2 is South Korea. I think South Korea. Number 3 is Japan. And America is like number 8, I think. I mean, these very developed, highly developed countries, it seems like people are just killing themselves more and more. And when you look at countries where you would imagine people would want to kill themselves, like maybe Haiti, where the poverty is just crushing, places like Somalia, places like Sudan, places like Libya, Liberia, even across some of the poorest countries in Latin America, what you see is a very, very low suicide rate. So what is it that makes people want to kill themselves when they have so much? And I just wonder if it's a lack of meaning, because obviously poverty is not, does not, by the numbers, cause people to want to commit suicide. But neither does wealth. However, it's meaning or lack thereof that I think makes people just want to end it. And what we're seeing in Japan is this places where people are killing themselves every day. 60 or 70 people a day in Japan committing suicide. The rate of, I think that if you try to measure healthy relationships, you look at things like romantic involvement among young men, you look at things like that, and what you find in Japan is that like 70% of marriageable young men in Japan don't have any sort of love interest. And about 70% of that 70% doesn't want one. They don't even want a love interest. When you ask them about why, they just say, oh, it's too much trouble. And I wonder if this is an effect of the easy availability of porn, of the obsession with devices and gaming and online, virtual life, that sort of thing, is that it takes away from actual life. It takes away from real life that helps you form connections, helps you form that social network, that social fabric that gives you a reason for getting out of bed in the morning. And if you don't have that, if your life revolves around just being engrossed in your device, if your life revolves around gaming or porn, God forbid, that you're not going to form those kinds of relationships, and that's going to really affect your life down the road. It's going to take away from the meaning of your life. And very often when people have hardship in their life, what they find is that meaning increases, that they have more meaning in their life. Okay, so going back to this knife attack that happened a couple days ago in Japan, this is actually not that uncommon in Japan. Japan has very, very draconian laws on self-defense, on guns. You really can't own a gun in Japan. And what we're seeing here is that it really doesn't stop people. I went back and looked up the history of it. There have been several of these horrific knife attacks in the last few years. And it seems to be very common that when they do attack, it's weird. They're not attacking like what you would think, politicians or somebody on the opposite side of the aisle politically. What they're attacking is schools, subways, things that just have the most innocent people possible. When there was a sarin gas attack back in I think the early 90s in Japan by Falun Gong, they used sarin gas to kill dozens of people in that attack, and it turns out that they had actually used that same method to kill hundreds of people in Japan before that, in the days leading up to that major attack. We saw several other knife attacks where people just, again, went crazy and just started slashing people on a bus or in a train or whatever with a knife. Obviously, it's not the device. You can't try to fix this problem by fixing the weapon, because people will always find a weapon. What we've seen elsewhere in Europe and even here in the United States is that in places where it's very difficult to get a gun, if a guy goes crazy and wants to kill people, he just rents a car and just runs them down. I was there in New York when that happened. Take a look at this.
Let's bring in now veteran Army Ranger and Frontlines correspondent Chuck Holton for an update on the New York terror threat there and the attack. Chuck, great to have you on the program.
Good to be with you, Grant. You know, we're right here where the rampage ended. This intersection off to my left is where the terrorist hit a school bus and ended his rampage. Now, there's a memorial beginning behind us. It's just getting started because this has still been an active crime scene up until late last night. And there, as you can see, lots of media around interviewing people. We had a chance to talk to a lady just a moment ago who's a nanny that is herself an immigrant, and she had some interesting things to say about what she thinks about this.
These people come into the country, and it's very hard for us to unite together. It's dangerous. I think they should have a really good check with them before they enter the country. And you know, sometimes the good have to suffer for the bad.
Yeah. So you think that the plan to maybe say, let's take a pause on letting people come in until we can vet these people? You think that's a good idea?
Yeah, a pause for a while and check them and let the good one come.
Yeah, right. Find a way to do that,
yes,
right? Now, you're an immigrant yourself.
Yes, I'm an immigrant. I'm from Jamaica, but they need to be more strict with the people that they let into the country.
Sure. Not a lot of terrorists from Jamaica.
No. We don't do that. We don't do that. We're very good people.
You say you're thinking about going back home.
Yeah, we're going back home to live.
Yeah, why is that?
I think it's much safer for us and the kids.
Well, Chuck, consider that. She says it's safer in Jamaica. Jamaica has its own problems with crime there. Once you get out of the major resort areas, Jamaica can be a very dangerous place. So can many cities across America. Look at Chicago. She says she's going home. She's a woman, though, Chuck, that you don't see interviewed often on the mainstream media. And I do believe that these reporters, all the ones you see behind you there, are interviewing people like that. They're just selectively choosing the interviews and not running one like that. You've got a black woman who says, clamp down on immigration. It's not the message they want to hear.
And she herself is an immigrant, and so she She advocates for stronger controls on who comes in because she wants to live in a safe place too. That's just it, is that by this unfettered suicide by immigration policy that the Obama administration was pursuing, we are taking away the very things about America that people want to come here for. That safety, that rule of law, that security. And, you know, she sees it. So, you know, Mayor Bill de Blasio is actually walking by right over here behind the camera right now. He just gave a press conference, came out of the local high school that was locked down here for several hours. And I went over before this hit and listened to a little bit of what he was saying. And it's the same kind of trite, you know, sayings, you know, oh, we're stronger than ever. We're not going to change the way we live as New Yorkers. But, you know, they are having to change the way they live as New Yorkers. We're seeing massive amounts of security on the street. They're having to put bollards up and put barriers up everywhere. It is changing the way America is living, and this suicide by immigration policy has got to stop.
So, you know, politicians always feel like they have to do something to fix every problem that comes up, when in reality, much of what they do, the second and third order effects of those things actually end up exacerbating those problems or even causing new problems. And so I think that we need to press our politicians to be careful about how we respond when bad things happen, because Japan obviously is a great example of, hey, you can ban guns all you want, but that's not going to stop people from going crazy and killing themselves in other ways. I mean, the vast majority of gun deaths here in the United States come from suicide, about 60%. And so there are more suicides in Japan per capita than we see in the United States. It's not, banning guns did not help suicides at all. Banning guns or any other device will do is inconvenience and cause law-abiding people to be more vulnerable. And making me more vulnerable is not a good way to make everybody else safer. To make us all more vulnerable, that's not a good way to make us safe. To give us the tools to make us, to facilitate our own defense, our ability to defend ourselves and our families is the best way to provide for the common defense, to provide for the defense of our families. The National Rifle Association has been pushing this for a long time. As you know, I worked with them for 6 years, and I saw this firsthand as I traveled around the world to places where guns are very highly restricted. What we found is that they don't stop people from killing each other. They definitely make law-abiding people less able to protect themselves and their families. And they might make the politicians feel better, but they also remove the regular common people's leverage against a tyrannical government like we've seen in Venezuela. You know, in Venezuela, they took away all the guns in 2012. And of course, there's no shortage of guns in Venezuela right now. I've been told that you can get a pistol for about $800 on the black market. But obviously, a law-abiding citizen is not going to do that. Who is going to do that? A criminal. I read an interesting article, just speaking of Venezuela very quickly, yesterday about how the crime is actually declining in some places in Venezuela simply because the criminals can't afford ammunition for their guns anymore. It's gotten so bad that even people who are stealing for a living realize there's nothing left to steal, and so they don't bother. And so there's less crime in places like Caracas than there have been in previous years, even though people are more and more desperate. And that, I think, is a true measure of just how low Venezuela has sunk. I mean, maybe somebody ought to point that out to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Maybe she's right. Maybe things will get better under socialism when people are so broke, when they're so destitute that they don't even have the energy to rob each other anymore. That's when socialism starts to work for the common good, maybe. Nevertheless, one other thing I wanted to talk about today, and that is probably a story you did not hear about. It's an IED attack in a restaurant near Toronto in Canada. Now, Canada is the land of the nice North Americans. It's hard to believe a terror attack like this would take place in Canada, but it did. Two guys walked into a restaurant. It was a Middle Eastern restaurant or an Indian restaurant, something like that, and detonated an IED. 15 people were injured. Fortunately, nobody killed. The perpetrators got away, and the police are still looking for them. They've released photographs of them and are asking for help from the public. Here's the really, I guess, not surprising thing, but really disgusting thing, aside from the fact that these cowards went in and intentionally tried to hurt innocent people. But the really disgusting outcome of this is that within 48 hours, the people who were in the restaurant have already filed suit against the restaurant for millions of dollars, claiming that the restaurant should have known that there was a danger of IED attacks and they should have done more to protect the people who were dining there from IED attacks. Now, to think about this is absolutely mind-boggling. You're talking about, listen, we're in Canada. We don't have IED attacks every day in Canada. We don't have shootings every day in Canada. We don't have terror attacks. They do happen, but it's very, very rare. And the chances of an IED attack happening in your particular restaurant that you own or where you happen to go eat is so infinitesimal that the idea that that some lawyers would pounce on this to try to make money off of this family, this mom and pop business that just lost their business because it got blown up. Their business has been closed since the event. It is really disgusting. It's really disheartening. And when you listen to what the lawyers have to say about it, it's all the more sickening because of what they say should have happened. They say what should have happened is that the people should have known and that there was a risk and they should have done something about it. Well, guess what? What can you do about it? You hire another employee as a security guard to stand out in front of every restaurant in Canada. That's not realistic. It's not feasible. Unfortunately, people in Canada are not allowed to protect themselves. And how do you protect yourself from a bomb anyway? I mean, you don't know it's there until it's gone off. So this is really kind of disgusting, profiteering off people's misery. And unfortunately, I think you're going to see more and more of that in the days and weeks to come. So that's all I've got for today, folks. I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and I hope you'll continue watching. We've got a lot of good things coming over the next couple of weeks. I'm making a trip to Afghanistan, and I'll be over there for a couple of weeks. So I'll be bringing you some on-the-ground reports about what's happening with the 15,000 coalition troops that are there, or 17,000, that sort of thing. And we're going to get a good sense of why we've still got troops in the region. And so I hope you'll stick around. Thanks for watching. I'm Chuck Holton. This has been The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.